Morning, Mr. Commissioner. Brian Wallace for the Code Commission. I just have a short administrative matter, which is to file as an exhibit the written re-examination. I think, Mr. Lunn, you have it from the Government of Canada. It's in a letter to the Commission dated April 7th. This is on the leftover from the WSP panel of the Regional Directors General of March the 4th, and at the conclusion of that day we ran out of time. I indicated I had one question in re-examination. On reflection, I don't. Mr. Timberg indicated he had two, and there was an exchange of correspondence, and the resulting letter from the Department of Justice to the Commission, including the two questions to the two panelists for re-examination and their answers. And I would ask that that be marked as the next exhibit.
Marked as Exhibit 717.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. It's Wendy Baker for the Commission with Maya Surumi. Today we have Mr. Carl English testifying in relation to technical report number 7, entitled the Fraser River Sockeye Fisheries and Fishery Management in Comparison with Bristol Bay Sockeye Fisheries. Mr. English will be reminded of his oath. He was here earlier.
I wish to remind you that you were still under oath.
Yes.
Thank you. You'll recall, Mr. Commissioner, that Mr. English was here in the very opening panel of this commission in the fall. Perhaps we can start by marking the report, and then I'll follow that with the CVs for the authors of the report. So the report has been circulated to all parties, and it's before you on the screen, if that could be marked as the next exhibit.
Exhibit 718.
And then I'd like to mark the CVs of the authors in the order they appear on the cover of this report. And those CVs have also been circulated to the parties, so I'll begin with the CV of Mr. English, and I'll take him to this CV once we finish marking all of the authors' CVs. So if Carl English's CV could be marked as the next exhibit.
719.
Followed by Tim Edgell.
720.
Robert Bocking.
721.
Michael Link.
722.
And finally, Scott Rayborn.
723.
Mr. English, you saw as those CVs were up on the screen for the different authors of the report, and can you confirm that those are the CVs provided for the authors?
Yes.
Thank you. And I'd like to then take you to your CV, which is, what did we say that was, 720? 719. Thank you. And just review this with you. You have a master's in zoology from the University of BC in 1981.
That's correct.
And you've worked in the area of fish science through your whole career, it looks like. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You have prepared numerous publications and reports, and those are outlined in your CV. The publications begin on page 6, and the reports are set out beginning on page 8. And if I could just review some of the project reports. You've prepared reports on the commercial sockeye salmon fishery in BC for the Marine Stewardship Council.
That's correct.
That was in 2010.
Yes.
You've also been involved in studies looking at radio telemetry for in-season assessment of sockeye returns in the Fraser system.
Yes.
You were an author of a Tsawwassen First Nation postseason fisheries report in 2009.
That's correct.
You've done work on review of salmon indicator streams and estimating escapement catch and run size for conservation units.
Yes.
You have looked at feasibility of fish wheel use and for escapement estimation, and looked at results from salmon radio tracking on the Lower Fraser.
That's correct. Yes.
You've looked at river entry timing, survival, and migration behavior of Fraser River sockeye.
Yes.
You've looked at in-river migration behavior and survival of summer run sockeye caught and released in the Lower Fraser.
Yes.
and many other topics. You've compared the Canadian Alaska sockeye stocks harvested in the northern boundary area.
Yes.
Your CV sets out obviously many more projects than I've highlighted, and many more, and you have articles on the topics that I've just reviewed with you. You've had publications published on those topics as well?
Some of them, yes.
Okay. Mr. Commissioner, I would ask that Mr. English be qualified as an expert in fisheries management and stock assessment. Thank you. So I'll just review the report, Project 7, which has now been marked as Exhibit 718. First of all, your report, if I can just provide a bit of an overview, it deals with four... Oh,
Ms. Grant, I just have a question on the expertise.
oh, all right.
I'm not doubting the expertise in any way, Mr. Commissioner. I'd just like to understand what we mean by fisheries management in that expertise. Are we talking about the management by DFO, or in which type of expertise are we talking about?
Mr. Commissioner, I propose that Mr. English be qualified as an expert in fisheries management science, generally, and of course in particular to sockeye in the Fraser system and in Alaska.
Did you want me to respond?
I'm not sure that he's limited to the Fraser and Alaska.
No, I didn't say that. I said generally, and in particular, the Fraser and Alaska.
Mr. English, you're aware that Aboriginal people have many forms of management. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
And are you in any way suggesting that you have expertise in their forms of management?
I work with Aboriginal fisheries managers, and as I have with federal and provincial fisheries managers, but I'm not a fisheries manager per se. I've worked with those people and studied their fisheries, but I certainly don't profess to know all the First Nations fisheries management strategies. They're very diverse and across the province.
Mr. Commissioner, can I take this witness as qualified? Thank you. Mr. English, your report deals with four broad topics, if I can just set the context for it, and I would describe these as, and I'm asking you to confirm this or provide your own summary, but I understand your report to deal with fisheries harvesting on the Fraser, fisheries management on the Fraser, fisheries harvesting and management in Bristol Bay, Alaska, and then a comparison of the Fraser and Bristol Bay fisheries.
That's correct, yes.
I'd like to start with the first part of your report, which deals with fisheries harvesting. And again, I understand this section deals with the accuracy, precision, and reliability of catch estimates in the Fraser system, and also impacts of non-retention fisheries. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Thank you. So beginning with the catch estimate portion of your report, at page 21, you begin dealing with this topic. There's a table on page 21, table 2, which sets out just a useful summary. If I could just start with that and ask you, with reference to the conclusions that are set out in that summary, what was the methodology that you used in performing your analysis?
So the first step here was to provide a definition of the terms accuracy, precision, and reliability, because those have different meanings to different people. So on a subsequent or previous page, not sure which page it's actually on.
17?
Yeah, 17. Where it was the three definitions were provided. The important aspect here under fish harvesting is that we actually don't know the true value of the catch, the true number of fish caught. They are all the numbers for most fisheries are estimates. Some are certainly more reliable than others. So in terms of the definition for accuracy, we looked at that in terms of the degree that managers are confident in that the catch reported reflects the actual harvest. And it's often evaluated on fisheries on a relative basis. So where accuracy is really focusing on whether the estimates are biased or not. So if they're relatively unbiased, you have a good estimate. If they have some known biases, then they get lower rating for terms of accuracy. Precision typically is looking at the variance around the catch estimate, how precise we actually know what that estimate is in a statistical sense. However, for a lot of fisheries, estimates of precision are not provided or available. And however, for ones where you're getting a complete count through a census type program, the precision would be rated very high, as would the accuracy. And then reliability was looked at in terms of the degree to which managers can rely on the catch estimates for in-season and post-season assessment. And we used a series of similar ratings there. The most important to note is that while an estimate could have a known bias, as it says here, it could still receive a little higher rating, a medium rating for reliability if the direction of that bias is known, so that individuals aware that, managers essentially aware that it is an underestimate or an overestimate of the catch.
Okay, so that explains those three terms. What else was important to the methodology used to assess the catch monitoring?
So from there, we looked at the methodologies used in the different catch monitoring programs, and any reports that we could obtain which actually described those methods, the numbers of samples taken, numbers of surveys conducted, and also in the table it presents an indication of the relative size of each of these fisheries during the 2001 to 2009 period, so roughly the portion of the total catch.
Okay, so that's again looking at table 2 on page 21?
That's correct, yes.
All right, so if you can just summarize what your results found as with reference to this table?
So for the period noted there, and more details are provided further on about different periods, but for 2001 to 2009 being the most recent period, we found that within the First Nation fisheries, that the estimates for food social ceremonial catch were rated as good accuracy, unknown precision in terms of statistical estimates of precision, and medium reliability. For the economic opportunity harvest, for reasons that we can get into in a bit later, it was rated similar in terms of accuracy, higher in terms of precision, and higher in terms of reliability. Both the commercial and recreational fisheries were rated as fair in terms of accuracy, and unknown or unavailable in terms of precision, medium in terms of reliability. The selective fisheries, which include fisheries that are targeting specific species and often are live capture fisheries, were and frequently they have a requirement for 100% observer monitoring or dockside reporting, so they have higher degree of accuracy, precision, and reliability. And the systems in the U.S., Alaska, and Washington were also rated as higher in terms of accuracy, precision, and reliability, as were test fisheries.
And the selective fisheries that you note there, that's a component of the Canadian commercial catch, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, I'd like to just go through each of these and fairly quickly, if we can, just outline the significant conclusions that you arrived at. The first area that you talk about is the First Nation fisheries, which again begins on page 21, as you see. And I think perhaps if we could go to page, sorry, I got my page number wrong here, page 25. This sets out a table which breaks the fisheries down into a more detailed level. Focus on those tables. Those are found at pages 29. Sorry, they're both on page 29. So if we look at table 4 and table 6 and 7, perhaps you can just review what your conclusions were with respect to starting with FFC fisheries.
All right, so for FSC fisheries, as you can see in the table, this was divided into 3 different strata or areas, marine fisheries, fisheries in the Fraser River below Sawmill, and fisheries above Sawmill. The reason for the separation within the Fraser is that there are different fisheries management situations below and above Sawmill, mostly related to the economic opportunity fisheries which occur below Sawmill. In terms of the summary of the findings, again for this 2001 to 2009 period, the marine and lower Fraser fisheries were rated as good in terms of accuracy, unknown regarding precision, and medium in terms of reliability. The slightly lower rating was provided for fisheries above Sawmill, and that's primarily related to the difficulty in monitoring extensive fisheries over a large area with, in some cases, much lower levels of effort. So encountering fishermen obtaining samples is much more challenging in the upper river. And then lastly, the economic opportunity fisheries were rated better, certainly for the period as it noted in the footnote, 2004 to 2009, and then in previous periods. But they're given a higher rating because of the requirement for the fish to be landed at a specific landing site with complete enumeration. Or landing sites, I should say, not a single site.
So the first part of Table 4, which sets out the FSC fisheries, there's more detail on that, I think, in reference to Tables 6 and 7. Perhaps we can turn there, page 29, and you can explain what data you reviewed and what the catch monitoring methods are that are relevant to these fisheries.
Yes. So here we have two different periods noted, 1992 to 2000, and then the 2001 to 2009. Now, there isn't a similar table for prior to 1992, because in 1992 was when the Aboriginal Fisheries Strategy Program kicked in, and a lot more effort was put into catch monitoring and working with First Nations to improve catch monitoring programs. So in the early period here, there was a lot of the fisheries methodology were being developed. A lot of individuals are being trained and get experience. So the reliability of the numbers was less than in the latter period. The distribution of the catch between marine fisheries and lower Fraser and upper Fraser, so below and above Sawmill, also has changed, you can see in the table. And this also reflects the portion of the catch taken in these fisheries versus other First Nation fisheries.
And what are the monitoring methods currently being used in First Nation fisheries, FSC fisheries, in the current period?
So they're a combination of effort estimates. Well, I guess it varies between the areas. So in marine fisheries, it's done by reporting. Essentially, the First Nations report their catch numbers obtained from interviewing and talking with their fishermen and providing those to DFO. In the lower Fraser, there's a variety of methods used to try and generate estimates. Certain First Nations do complete enumeration of their FSC catch through interviews with all their fishermen. That's in the case of groups like Tawasin. And others, there's a combination of aerial overflights to count effort and interviews to get catch per effort estimates and generate a estimate which is independent of the total catch reporting for the fishermen on a voluntary basis. And similar methods are used upstream of sawmill. There, they have a combination of aerial counts, on-water counts, shore-based counts with using trucks to estimate effort, and then interviews to estimate catch per effort. So here we have the two different periods, or three different periods identified. Pre-AFS, when there essentially isn't information on First Nations catch portion. The early AFS programs in 1992 to 2003, where there had fisheries occurring for both FSC and commercial purposes at similar times, essentially not complete separation as in the period after 2004. And the methods used since the beginning of AFS was to require fish that were landed for commercial purposes or either through this pilot sales or economic opportunity fisheries to be landed at specific landing sites and enumerated at those sites.
Okay. And then lastly, in this section at tables 11 and 12, you set out specific tables with respect to Musqueam, Tsawwassen, and Stalo fisheries. What's the significance of this data in relation to the reliability of catch estimates?
All right, so you can see there's in this table, there's columns that refer to allocations, and the allocations are defined or not defined depending on whether there's an agreement with those First Nations. And there's columns associated with the catch estimates for each of the years. For the period prior to 2003, there are, I think, generally agreements in all those years, but the separation of the catch between FSC and sales is not as reliable as post that period. But the total catch estimates are believed to be pretty reliable for the periods, and improving, as I said before, because the catch monitoring programs evolved and improved steadily since the '92 initiation of the Aboriginal Fisheries Strategy program.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, in years without agreements, there isn't an allocation, and so in some years there wasn't an actual estimate obtained, as you can see in 2003.
So the 2004 period and following that, where you see the allocation broken into FSC and sales, that correlates with the earlier table, table 10, where you have your data broken into early AFS 92 to 03 and then recent AFS 2004 to 2009.
That's correct.
Okay. So that you said that the total catch estimates are you consider to be reliable. There may be inaccuracies between the two columns, FFC and sales, but the total is considered to be reliable?
Yes. As you can see, there's large fluctuations from year to year in the numbers of fish that are in either the FSC or sales columns, and those are clearly not reasonable given what we know about the fisheries. So the suspicion is that they're not being appropriately assigned in those specific years.
But the total for the year for that First Nation is correct, or reliable?
Yeah, it's certainly the most reliable and improving over time.
Okay. Thank you. Now moving to commercial fisheries, that section in your report begins at page 39, which is on page 42. All right, this sets out a summary of the different commercial catch areas and gear types. Again, with the quality of catch estimates for those different gear types and areas set out. Can you provide an overview of the monitoring and estimates for each of the fisheries?
Yes, I think the first point I'd like to make is that this again covers the 2001 to 2009 period. Prior to 98, a lot of the estimates for commercial catch were derived from sales slip programs, and since then they've been derived from a variety of other programs, including on-water gear counts, logbook programs, phone-in data, on-water hails, dockside monitoring, and occasional observer programs. So it's changed quite dramatically from earlier years to the more recent time frame. So this table is referring to the 2001 to 2009 period. In terms of the different fisheries, you can see that the net fisheries, whether they're in Area 20 with seine nets or gill nets in Area 29, or a combination of gear in areas 11 to 16, they were given a fair rating and with medium reliability. The rationale for that is that for most of those fisheries and most of this period, compliance rates for phone-in reporting and what were relatively low in the 10 to 25% of the fishermen providing phone-in records, and the lack of catch validation at landing sites for most of that period.
Could I interrupt for a moment? I wonder if you could, before we get into the results, just using this as a touch point, catch monitoring programs are in the different fisheries, and then we can maybe move to the conclusion so there's a context for that.
Sure. For the net gear, the programs that are currently used use a combination of these aerial counts or on-water gear counts at the beginning of fisheries. These fisheries are often contained to a few days, so and possibly a single day. So there's a gear count, and then the on-water hails, phone-in data, logbook data are combined to get catch per effort, and so the catch per effort is applied to the total effort to generate a catch estimate. For troll fisheries, they are distributed over a much longer period of time, often, and so they'll get a gear count of trollers at the same time as they're doing a count for seiners or gill netters, but they won't be doing gear counts every day. So there'll be an estimate of the number of trollers active. They might also use other information from contacting directly the trollers in an area to determine the number of boats active. And then again, using the hail data and phone-in data to get catch per effort information. I started off talking a bit about the compliance rates. The compliance rates for trollers are much better. That's why you see a higher rating on this scale of fair, good to very good for accuracy, and higher in terms of reliability.
And then the last fishery is the selective fishery.
Okay, and so for selective fisheries, as indicated earlier, there's a requirement for 100% either dockside monitoring of catches or observers on board in these fisheries to validate the catches, so it receives the highest rating.
In 2010, dockside monitoring was introduced into certain commercial fisheries. Can you describe which fisheries were the subject of dockside monitoring, which fisheries that was implemented in, and what the impact that dockside monitoring had on catch estimates in those fisheries?
So in 2010, it was a requirement for both seine and troll fisheries, and it was a requirement for 100% dockside monitoring in those fisheries, and in the lower Fraser gillnet fishery and in fisheries, I guess also in Johnson Straits, it was 35% requirement to have dockside monitoring represent 35% of the catch.
And what did that impact, or does that impact the reliability of the catch estimates?
Yes, 100% dockside monitoring obviously should vastly improve the estimates of catch versus no dockside monitoring, and is generally the approach used in other fisheries to really improve the reliability of catch.
The experiment in 2010 with dockside monitoring change any of your assessment or impact any of the assessment that you have in Table 14 on the quality of catch estimates?
No, because it period is for 2001, 2009.
Okay. How long would you need to have dockside monitoring in place to, at 100%, to change your assessment of the quality of catch estimates?
Well, I think for whatever years it's done for, it would should immediately change the quality of the catch information.
Just while we're in the commercial fishery section, on page 43 of your report, the very first paragraph on that page, you'll see about halfway through the paragraph a reference to an FOS system. What does that FOS refer to?
That's fisheries operational system.
Okay, thank you.
Fisheries operation system.
Thanks. And what is a fisheries operation system?
It's the program that DFO currently uses to accumulate all the information on effort estimates from the various commercial fisheries and catch per effort estimates from either fisheries officer hails, phone-in programs, logbooks, any sources of those information. It's also used to organize catch information from other fisheries now.
And I'd like to move to recreational fisheries, which is page 48 in your report is where you begin that discussion. And if on page 50, in table 16, you set out the estimates of Fraser sockeye harvested in Canadian recreational fisheries, and you have the percentage, which is defined as the recreational catch. Is that, on this table, is that percentage calculated against the total Canadian and U.S. catch, or against the Canadian catch only?
It combines both Canadian and U.S. catch.
Have you done a calculation to see what the percentage would be against the Canadian catch only?
Yes, I have.
And does it change the outcome in that column?
It does change the numbers. Obviously, they all go up slightly because in most years the U.S. Fisheries catch some Fraser sockeye.
Does it significantly change the numbers in that column?
No, it's fairly small. It's usually a percentage or a percentage and a half different.
Okay, so on your calculation, has the recreational catch ever exceeded 5% of the total Canadian catch?
Not in these years, using the data I have.
Turning the page to page 51, table 17. Again, can you review the results and review also what the catch monitoring program is for the recreational fisheries as shown on this table?
Okay, so here we have 3 different areas in tidal waters. Tidal waters being in the context of the Fraser, everything below the Mission Bridge and into the marine environment. And non-tidal waters, most of the fishery occurs for sockeye between Mission and Hope, BC. In the tidal waters, there's the Georgia Strait Creel survey has been conducted since the early 1980s. And I have a fair bit of experience with that since we conducted the survey from 86 through to about 99. The estimate, there's a column there shows the estimate of a portion of the recreational catch of sockeye that is coming from each of these fisheries. So you can see that in this time period, 2001, 2009, the Georgia Strait fishery only represented 5%. Catch, Johnson Strait's 2%, West Coast Vancouver Island, less than 1%, so it's not showing up here because it's a very small amount. And then most of the fishery is occurring in the Fraser River between Mission and Hope, most of the recreational fishery. The methods used to estimate catch are similar in Georgia Strait and Johnson Straits. However, the level of effort applied in those two areas varies and can vary quite significantly between years. The effort estimate is derived from, in a similar manner to I think what you've already seen for the lower Fraser, in that people do aerial flights over the strait, count numbers of boats, fishing, sport fishing, and then interview people at landing sites to get information on catch per effort. And those two things are combined. They use activity patterns to figure out whether they're seeing a large portion of the effort or a smaller portion and expand the effort appropriately. The precision estimates that are available for Georgia Strait are pretty broad, depending on the year, and even broader if you look at for specific statistical areas, parts of the fishery. And the reason for that is that sockeye are not the primary target for most of the marine sport fisheries. They're targeting Chinook and coho primarily. And there's quite a variability in the efficiency of the anglers that fish, so you get high variability in catch per effort. Some people really know how to catch sockeye, and a lot of people don't. The result of that, plus the fact that there's a relatively small catch compared to the target species, means that the sample sizes are poorer, so the estimates are only given a fair in terms of accuracy, but medium in terms of reliability, because the fishery the catch monitoring has for Georgia Strait has good coverage of the entire area and time when sockeye are caught. Lower ratings for Johnson Strait because of the lower effort and difficulties with complete coverage. West Coast Vancouver Island is much more difficult because assessing what portion of the sockeye in that area are associated with the Fraser versus other stocks. They can catch, most of the catch out there is for Barkley Sound stocks. So the reliability estimates for Fraser are much less. Fraser River itself, they're using aerial flights and angler interviews spread out over a wide area. The ratings there were somewhat lower, mostly because there's a large amount of the catch is in some years is fish that are released, and so the numbers, you're relying on angler recall for the numbers of fish they've caught and released. You can't actually examine the numbers released. When you interview a person, they only have the fish they retained.
The numbers that, or the catch estimates that we see on here for those non-tidal water recreational fishers that you just described, does that just reflect then the caught and retained fish, or does it also include the caught and released fish?
I think those numbers are just the retained fish.
And I'm just not sure if creel surveys have been defined yet in the hearings, and I wonder if that might be something you could just quickly do here. Is it the same as angler interviews, or could you just give us a shorthand for what that means?
Yeah, I use the term because that was the name given to the program used in Georgia Strait for years. Strictly speaking, is directly related to interviews. So you're talking with people and you're examining their creel. People used to put their fish in a creel when it started. In these, when it's referred to as a particular program, like the Georgia Strait Creel Survey Program, it includes all the other elements of aerial surveys and effort counts. So it's more than just interviews.
Okay. On page 53 and 54, you you discuss a study that you were involved in 2002, which recommended certain changes to the catch monitoring program. And in your report, at the top of page 54, you state that it's unknown if all of these recommendations, you set out 6 recommendations, it's unknown if all these recommendations were implemented. But as mentioned previously, the precision of the estimates of sockeye salmon for GSCS has declined since 1999. And I wonder if you could just review what you did in that work and what the recommendations are, and whether you have any more information now about whether they've been implemented.
Yes. So at the end of our involvement with the Georgia Strait Creel Survey, prepared a report for the years prior to 1999, or including 1999 and before, and that was published in 2002. And in that, it contained, I think it was six recommendations. Some related to just the effort that we thought was appropriate to obtain reliable estimates for either catch per effort or what we refer to as activity patterns, the pattern of fishing activity over the day. It also proposed some changes to estimation methods to make them more robust, and some logistical suggestions with regard to how the estimates should be reviewed by people familiar with the survey. So I did, subsequent to preparing this report, we were able to talk with the people currently doing the program and confirm that they are targeting the numbers of interviews and conducting analysis in a manner consistent with recommendations 1 and 2 in that report. The only caveat there is the issue of budgets and whether there's the funds to carry out the work in all the areas. There's some question about the current, how much of the analytical changes had been implemented. There's been reviews since this report was prepared that have suggested some other changes to the estimation procedures. The degree that those have either compensated for the same issues or been done in addition to these is yet to be determined. And the current program has, the programs that we wrote have been revised in what they refer to now as the CREST system. And don't ask me what CREST stands for, because I don't know the answer to that, but it's a system that they use to do the programming, which allows the managers more flexibility in selecting information that they think is most reliable to get the best estimates. So some of those recommendations that we had related to that are incorporated into the new CREST system.
Just now that there's a proportion of the recreational catch which is released. And if I can take you to that section of your report, it begins at page 56. If you can just describe for us what non-retention fisheries are.
Okay, so we have 2 types of examples of non-retention. Those where a fish is physically caught and then released because it's of a species that's not permitted to retain, or in the case of anglers, the individuals exceeded their or achieved their bag limit, so they can't retain any more of that species. And then there's the types of non-retention where the gear doesn't retain fish. So in the case of a gill net, for example, fish may encounter it, the fisherman doesn't get to the fish in time, so the fish escapes that gear and is not retained by it, and so escapes capture.
Okay, and that second type that you've described, is that, in your report you call it net fallout. Is it also called dropout? We've heard that term.
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
net dropout.
And what was the methodology that you followed in your analysis of the effects of non-retention fisheries?
So For non-retention fisheries, we did a review of the, this was done by some of the individuals who have done extensive work on the physiology and stress of fish. So there's a number of references regarding the work that has been done recently on the effects of handling, capture and handling on the survival of sockeye. And then we looked at the some of the initial results from studies that have been conducted in the last few years, specifically in the lower Fraser, where fish are captured, tagged and released, or tagged then held and released. And also information from sockeye telemetry studies that have been conducted from 2002 to 2009, which provide information on the timing, location of en route losses, as well as the portions that don't make it to the spawning grounds.
And is there a particular fishery where non-retention issues are of most importance for Fraser River sockeye?
Yeah, so the catch and release side of the non-retention, that's the lower Fraser recreational fishery, is the place where most of that occurs.
And is there any significance to the non-retention fishery in relation to the total allowable recreational catch?
Yes, in 4 out of the last 6 years, the releases of sockeye in the lower Fraser recreational fishery have exceeded the retained catch. And I say last 4 to 6 years. The years I'm referring to is 2004 to 2009.
And why does that matter if the fish have been released?
Well, if the fish are released in healthy condition, have been handled well, the temperatures are not too high, then there's a good chance they'll continue their migration and hopefully spawn. If those things are not true, then you could end up with a number of those fish dying before reaching the spawning grounds.
And Table 18 on page 60 of your report sets out some information with respect to survival rates, if you could review that information.
Yes, so this is a study that has just been recently published, as you can see, by Donaldson et al. In 2011. And it provides information on the short term, so up to 24 hours after capture, survival, up to 48 hours after capture, up to 96 hours after capture, and then the results of tracking radio fish from caught using the different gear from the release site to the spawning grounds, or to areas close to the spawning areas for these stocks that were tagged. There's 3 different capture methods and handling approaches, if you like. They're beach seine, just 2 capture methods, really, 2 beach seines and angling. And then some of the fish were retained in a net pen for recovery, thinking that it would actually, it might help in the recovery of the fish. It obviously didn't.
Yeah, so if you can just explain the results of the study.
Okay, so for short-term survivorship, whether it's caught with a beach seine or angling, appears to be pretty high. You can see the percentages are over 95% survive that immediate period. They start to drop just within the first 48 hours and further in the 96 hours. And then the portion of the fish that are actually go from the release site to the spawning grounds is substantially lower. The difference between the gears start to appear the further, or to become more dramatic the further you go up, further from the release site. And by the time you're getting to the spawning grounds, you're seeing that 52% of the fish that were released from beach seines have made it to the spawning grounds or areas, and 36% from angling, and only 2 or 3% from those that were held in a net pen. Now, it's also important to note here is that there's a number of things that go on between the release site in terms of other fisheries and other environmental factors. So these should be viewed as relative values, not absolute values that are specifically associated with that particular gear type. There's other things that can happen to the fish. So some of these fish could readily have been caught by other fisheries en route.
What kind of scientific work has been done on post-release mortality associated with freshwater gear types across the different fishing sectors for Pacific salmon?
Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
Yeah, I'm looking at page 57 of your report, the first paragraph on that. I'm asking you what scientific information there is in the community on post-release mortality associated with freshwater gear type.
Well, there is not, as it says in the report, there's not a lot of information. That's one of the reasons for this study that it was quoted here. There's an ongoing research program that is being funded through INSERC, and it's a program, it's a collaborative effort between Carleton University and UBC to actually examine the post-release mortality for fish caught using a variety of different gears. The recent stuff, which I just talked about, plus the information from fish that have been radio tagged from either tangle netting or caught using fish wheels, also provides additional information on survivorship post-release.
You say in your report that there's little research to quantify levels of mortality or to understand the mechanism underlying mortality in order to better mitigate or prevent mortality. What do you mean by that?
Well, that's specifically getting at the issue of that we need more information, especially under the higher stress conditions with warming temperatures in the river. If you're going to conduct fisheries that are having additional stresses on fish that are being released, then you need to take that into account when you're opening those fisheries, the timing of those fisheries, and the location of those fisheries.
Right. And what are the implications then to fisheries management of non-retention fisheries, catch and release fisheries?
Well, I think it's just what I said. It's I think both the fishers and the managers need to consider the impact of their fisheries on the stocks they're targeting or releasing in some of these cases during periods when these fish are stressed either because of high temperatures or flow conditions in the river.
All right. And on page 61 in the middle paragraph, you make the statement, you say, while there's little that can be done about annual water temperatures or difficult passage points, it is possible to minimize cumulative effects, environmental and fishery-related factors by disassociating the timing and location of in-river fisheries from these other stressors. And is that a summary of the point you were just making?
That's correct, yes.
Right. And is that being done now, that there is an awareness of mortality impacts in terms of fishing plans and recreational fishery openings?
I think there's a growing awareness and consideration of these in the plans for fisheries in the last few years.
The next section that I wanted to take you through in your report deals with fisheries management. In this section, which begins at page 63, you address pre-season forecasts, in-season run size assessment, escapement enumeration, escapement targets, overharvesting, and Cultus Lake recovery efforts. So I'd like to start with pre-season forecasts. What methodology did you follow in assessing pre-season forecasts used presently by the Department of Fisheries and Oceans?
So the first step was to examine the types of models and methods that were used for the pre-season forecasting, and then to obtain the data essentially the estimates of what those forecasts were for each year prior to the fishing season, and then compare those with the return that was tallied up at the end of the year. The difference in our analyses for evaluating preseason forecasting compared to those for the catch monitoring that we just talked about is that we actually know what the value is that's trying to be estimated. While we might not know exactly how many fish truly returned in a given year, we know that we're trying to estimate what the number is that that we're tallying up at the end of the year. So that was viewed as the true value that we're trying to estimate, and then we compared the forecast with those postseason values. Two primary tools, regression analysis, which I can describe, and estimates of absolute percent error. So the amount that the forecast differed from the actual return.
And the page that's on the screen in front of you, underneath the indented paragraphs, about the fourth line down, it says the Fraser River Sockeye Spawning Initiative Frizzy process uses forecasts of adult returns for each of the 4 run timing groups to define the target harvest rates for each group. We have spent some time talking about the Frizzy process and the Frizzy model in these hearings, and I just want to be clear here. Are you suggesting that the Frizzy computer model is in any way the same as the preseason forecast computer model?
No, the Frizzy model is not the same as the preseason forecast model. They might use similar stock recruitment analyses as some of their options, but they're not the same model.
Okay. And turning to page, looking I guess still at page 63 at the bottom, what were your conclusions about the reliability of the preseason forecasts as being explanatory of actual returns?
Okay, so the forecast for the total return to Fraser sockeye in a given year, so at that level, that's combining all the different stocks and run timing components, has explained 44% of the year-to-year variability in returns. This leaves more than half of the variability unexplained, so it's accounting for not all the variability. The percent error in the forecast for most of the Fraser stocks is high compared to some other fisheries, specifically Bristol Bay sockeye fishery, and that's described sort of later in the report.
And do you draw any inference from that?
Yeah, so there's the more detailed inferences come with trying to look at the components of the stock, not just at the overall estimates for the Fraser, and that was done using this regression analysis. The important thing, the regression analysis is relating the returns over time to the forecasts over the same period. So what you're looking for there, I don't know whether it's possible to put up one of the appendices. I can show what the relationship looks like.
Yep, if you can just tell us
Okay.
the page number.
We could put up the one for the overall Fraser, which is, I think, the first one on page G2. So it's appendix G, page 2. So these are done on a logarithmic scale, and there you have the forecast on the lower axis and the return, the estimated return for each of the years on the y-axis, the perpendicular axis. And what we're doing is looking to see if there's a significant relationship between these two values. The important things that are being examined are the R value, so whether it's significant or not. The P value there indicates whether it is significant. So you can see it's much less than a 0.05 level, which would typically be used for evaluating significance. So it's a significant relationship The other things we examined, whether the slope is significantly different than zero. If it was zero, the slope of that line would be horizontal. So that the reason why that's examined is to see whether when we forecast more fish actually return. So there's a relationship between the two values. And then also look to see whether the intercept, where this line intersects with the y-axis, the vertical axis, is significantly different than zero. And all those things tell you about the quality of the relationship between the forecast and the return.
Okay, I wonder if we could go to page 77 of the report. And on this page, you have a figure that sets out the year-to-year variation in returns, as explained by the forecast.
So here it is displaying the R-square value. So this is the degree to which those points you saw in the last line are tight to the curve, so that, or the line, they're not differing a lot, and you have a significant relationship or not. So where there's an asterisk over the column, it indicates that the relationship is statistically significant, and the height of the bar indicates the R-square value. So the higher the bar, the better the relationship. On the very far right, you have the Fraser River as a total, so all component stocks combined. The next 4 bars on the right are for each of the run timing groups. And then the bars, the remainder bars are color-coded according to the different run timing groups. So the dark bars are for late run fish. The clear bars are for summer run. The shaded bars are for early summers, and then the one with the diagonal hatching is for early Stewart. So you can see the early Stewart component is identical in both the far left and in the right graph, because it is just one stock.
And in the text that follows this table, you say that the forecasts for all run timing groups were deemed to be statistically significant since they track the patterns of rise and fall in the actual returns for the period 1980 to 2009. That's correct?
That's correct, yes. But there is quite a difference in the R-square value and the level of confidence you have in the relationship between these variables, between what we see for late summer and early Stewart, a much higher R-square value than we do for the 2 summertime groups.
Right. And the table that follows, table 21, is this an analysis of those run timing groups in a bit more detail?
Yes, that provides the other statistics from the regression analysis, and also provides the MAPE, which is the median absolute percent error. So that gives you an indication of how variable the points are around the line. The slope is what you look at to see if that value is close to 1. So slopes that are close to 1 are more reliable relationship, or more useful relationship, the ones that are further away. And then the regression intercept, that's whether it intersects the y axis at a point significantly different than 0 or not. So it's not, for every one of these cases, the intercepts are not significantly different than 0, and the slopes are significantly different than 1. The reason for the poor regression values for the R value for the summertime groups and also early summers are slightly different. The if you go back to the previous graph, I can maybe describe it better with that up. So you can see that some of the summertime groups have a high R-square and significant R-square, where two of them don't. They're non-significant and low, Chilco and Stalaco. So they're resulting in a much less reliable forecast. And it's particularly noteworthy because the Chilco stock contributes on average about 24% to the total return. So that's a significant difficulty when the forecasts are low, low in terms of R squared. And for the early summer forecasts, because the components of this stock are relatively small, and 3 of the 8 stocks, you can see the shaded values, are non-significant relationships. That's the reason for the overall timing group to have a lower R squared. Plus, these fish are distributed throughout the whole watershed, as opposed to some of the other ones that are more confined to parts of the watershed.
The table that we were just looking at, table 21, I just wanted to draw your attention to the title or the caption. This third line down, it says proportional size of CU relative to total Fraser return. Is that really supposed to read proportional size of run timing group relative to total Fraser return?
That's correct. The CUs are provided in the appendix.
Okay. And the return explained by forecast R squared column on this table is what we see in table figure 10 that we've just been looking at? The 44%, 76%, et cetera. That's the, if we go back to table 10, that's the values you see on the right-hand side of that table?
That's correct.
Okay. And then is there a relation, does this tell the whole story, or do we need to also look at what the information is in figure 9, which is page 76, the page previous to this?
Yes, so this figure was provided because the regression analysis doesn't tell the whole story. It's very important for the management of the resources to have a small error or a small difference between the forecasts and the return. And you can see from this graph that it shows the distribution of estimates over this period from 1980 to 2009. And it's summarized in what's called a box and whiskers plot. The box defines the space between the 25th and the 75th percentile, so the middle 50% of the estimates falling within that box. The line is the median, so it's 50% of the estimates are below that line and 50% of the estimates are above that line. And the whiskers extend out to the either the lower 5th percentile or the upper 95th percentile. So the length of these whiskers. Now, in order to be able to see this, on the graph, the scale was limited to 1 to 350% of the estimate. You can see the values at the top of some of those lines extend to as high as 844%, or 882, I guess, the highest for portage. So there have been obviously returns that vary very substantially from the forecasts, and this becomes most graphic in the comparison between these values and the ones for Bristol Bay, which we'll talk about later. But it shows pretty clearly that there's a fair bit of uncertainty associated with the estimates, both for individual stocks and for the different timing groups.
Does whether a stock is a cyclic stock or a strongly cyclic stock versus a non-strongly cyclic stock have any impact on the reliability of the forecasts?
What we see in most cases where the more cyclic stocks, if you go back to the other graph, other plot, so you can see it in both, but I'll start here. The late Shuswap stock and the Quesnel are two of the most cyclic stocks, and also early Stewart is somewhat cyclic stock, but not as extreme as the other two. We have higher R squared, and this is because the range of returns is very large. So you get a better regression, if you like, if you have a larger range of returns, and you can distinguish between, the small years and the big years based on those cycles. The other thing that it does is that if you go back to the previous graph, figure 9, you could get for late Shuswap, for example, if you misestimate a very small return, but you could easily do it by 3 or 4 times, whereas virtually all the large returns for late Shuswap would be well within the box. So the length of the whisker, or the length of the line, is more determined for that stock and for Quesnel by the returns in the off-cycle years and the small years.
Just to finish this section, and then I guess we'll take the break, but if I could ask you to turn to page 80 of the report, your final paragraph in this section. Oh, no, back up. Stop. You say at the last sentence, really, that importantly our trend analysis is based on historical data and may have limited ability to predict future reliability forecasts for a particular stock, especially if changing environmental conditions undermine the utility of even the best performing preseason forecasts based on historical data. Yet another reason why preseason forecasts are of little use in management of the Fraser sockeye and many southern BC salmon stocks. And earlier in that paragraph, you note that managers rely on in-season information in the Fraser system to manage the stocks. So I just have a couple of questions about that. First, is it reasonable for managers to rely on in-season information to manage fisheries, first of all?
Yes, it's both reasonable, safer, and a more robust approach.
Okay. And do you think preseason forecasts could be made more accurate so that managers didn't have to rely as heavily on in-season assessments?
Yeah, they probably could be made more accurate, but they would need to still rely on in-season assessments, mainly for the reason that the forecasting is all based on information you have from the past, and the information that you really need is what's going to happen in the future, or what's going to happen in the specific year in question. So you need that in-season information.
All right. Do you think that the preseason forecasts are of use that preseason forecasts, maybe not these ones, but preseason forecasts as a concept that are of use in managing the Fraser sockeye system?
Yeah, I think you need to have something to work with for the preseason planning, for setting initial fishing plans. But those fishing plans need to be robust to substantial changes in the returns, because that's going to happen.
So you agree that we did hear in this commission testimony from fisheries managers, both at the Department of Fisheries and Oceans and from the Pacific Salmon Commission, that they did use preseason forecasts, and they described the value that they put on those forecasts. So, and it sounds like you're agreeing that there is a role for preseason forecasts in management. Is that right?
Yeah, there is definitely a role for it.
Okay. So how do you think there should be a different way of using preseason forecasts, or a different way of generating preseason forecasts that would be better used in the Fraser system than what's being done now?
Yeah, I think it's the amount of resources spent doing the forecasts versus some of the other tasks that might need to be done by, in many cases, the same analysts. So I personally recommend that forecasts be done expeditiously, so people don't spend a lot of time with them. They have a number. They know managers are going to not pay a lot of attention to that number for in-season management. They'd use that number for planning, but then get on with the tasks of doing some of the other work, like defining benchmarks for the CUs that will require a lot of the same analysis and effort, and would be a far more useful expenditure of the time and energy.
So how would you recommend the preseason forecasting process as it's currently being done to be changed?
Well, to the extent that, and I don't know exactly how long it takes to go through that process. But to the extent that it could be made simpler or done very efficiently so that there's a number that people can use for the planning, recognizing that it's going to be changed in season, and the focus should be on more robust management systems so that you can respond to changes in run.
All right, do you recommend that they continue to assess the best fit model, stock recruitment model each year for each stock?
Well, that's one area which has been examined in Alaska. We may talk a bit about it in the review of the Bristol Bay fishery, but is a different approach to evaluating the models every year. There's quite a number of models, as you can see in this report, that have been used, and there's quite a number of times they shift, and there's often, for most stocks, there's rarely the same model used in successive years, whereas in Bristol Bay, they tend to use the same model that has been had a good result for the last 3 years at least, if not more.
This is probably a good time to take a break, so I just wanted to leave with you. Are there any other comments you would make on preseason forecast before we take the break?
No, I think that pretty much covers what I was hoping to say.
Hearing will now recess for 15 minutes.